judicial killings and abductions that have been going on lately. Now, in 2014, we had cyber stalking and cyberbullying, which were included in a government report as forms of domestic violence. Now, given most of the research that has been found or statistics made are intimate partner violence, and that can range in this particular conversation, right? Because most of these women are affected by their partners, or their husband, boyfriend, someone they met, intimate partners, they all go into that kind of pool, right? So we're looking here, you know, at the angle of now the women who cannot be able to speak, the women who, you know, are not quite comfortable. We're looking at the economic situation. Some of them feel bound by that to the point where unfortunately they lose their lives. So apart from, you know, having the governmental law enforcement looking at these particular matters, when you face this different perspectives from these women, what kind of advice or what kind of help do you usually give them so that it has a form of direction apart from, you know, us reporting on how the situation looks like on the ground, looking at how much it varies?
Let me say that femicide is a form of gender-based violence, but it's the worst form of gender-based violence. That's why when you look at femicide, you must understand it from that perspective. It is, you know, the targeted killing of women and girls because of their gender. For that reason alone, you must look at the perspective in terms of how does it happen, why is it happening, and now the unprecedented level that we're seeing. Yes, technology has contributed. I must say we now have what we call technology-assisted gender-based violence, which is a new and developed and emerging sort of gender-based violence. But then again, technology is good, but technology is evil. And I think with the kind of the victims we've seen, majority of them being university students, we do need to, as civil society, we need to go to the university and we need to talk to them. I feel we need to empower them. And I'm not saying that so that we do any kind of blame. There's no one to blame here. But empowering our young ones. How does that look like? You know, because we need to tell them. I know what the president said, don't talk to strangers. It sounds very trivial. But maybe we must look at it in terms of, maybe he says that there's need for empowerment. But it's kind of tricky when you say that because it doesn't bring in the seriousness of this debate. But however, I think we need to empower. We need to empower girls. We need to go to the universities, the colleges, and talk about femicide so that it's something that is spoken about within the colleges, within the universities. It can even be part of the curriculum so that if it's a debate, we must then do much. So we then have a lot, including legislative framework. Is it time that perhaps we made femicide, you know, on its own, it's a crime and not push it under the umbrella of murder because it's horrific, it's brutal, the target is women and girls. So there's more to it than just saying someone was murdered, they will be charged with murder. The issue here is femicide. Perhaps it's time we looked at it from the perspective. Do we want it to be a standalone crime? Is it time perhaps we amend the penal code? Because the laws are there, but the laws are not working. So there's definitely a gap. So then the conversation ought to be, yes, it ought to be a national crisis, but in terms of legal reforms, what can we do for us as lawyers? We're looking at it from that perspective. Right. So there's a lot that needs to be done comprehensively.
All right. Rachel, there's also the perspective of law enforcement officers not having adequate training in being able to handle these cases. Again, it's not new. Like you mentioned, back in 2018, there were the same discussions about declaring this a national disaster, you know, about what should be done. So maybe you can point to us exactly what you feel has been done, what hasn't, and do you feel like there's any change in our law enforcement in how they handle or their understanding on what to do when such cases occur?
For me, first, I see this as a systematic problem. If you look back to the pre-colonial, when the Modoni Njiro was murdered just here in Central outside because of our role in ensuring that Arithuk was released. And that, if you ask me, is a form of femicide. Seeing a liberator being killed and not being acknowledged as femicide. It has been historically in Kenya where women, especially even women human rights defenders, are being killed, but no action is being taken. This last month we had a case of one of our late comrades, Elizabeth Ikaru, was murdered in Isiolo. But you could see it has taken a lot of work from social movements, civil society activists, feminists to put in pressure. We have done like a lot of protests. Even in that judiciary, we have taken a lot of our petition to the current Chief Justice to say that judiciary is a big letdown because the moment also we are trying to see if policy are working in place, or if you look the commitments Kenya made during the Gender Equality Forum around even supporting victims and survivors of gender-based violence, yet until today, government of Kenya has not put in mechanism even of safe houses, facilities that are owned by the government to be able to support survivors of gender-based violence. But if you look on the other side, I would say women of Kenya in our own diversity, feminist activists, and even the way I was saying, being part, CGHRD, being part of End Femicide movement, we have been doing work since then. Right. Even if you saw the case of also what we went to Kiambu Law Courts of Lucy Njambi, who was murdered by the husband who was a duty bearer, an MCA. So you find where it becomes a challenge that majority of our duty bearers are the perpetrators of femicide. Majority of our duty bearers are perpetrators of abduction. They're perpetrators of also arbitrary arrest or even facilitating EJEs, extrajudicial killings. So you find at this end, as much as we are trying to educate our community, we are trying to say the country things are not moving, but the perpetrators are the people in power position. So how would you go and tell a police, please change, or please we are bringing, let's say, for example, now that they're criminalizing even right to protest, notification for you to give us, quote unquote, which we shouldn't ask notification for protest. But we have seen even now, Oko is missing. I don't know if she has been found.
She has been.
She has been found? Boniface Mwangi was abducted. Last weekend, we spent a lot of hours in trying to find him. But you see, all these abductions, they start as a form of abduction, then they end up you being killed. But Kenyans, when we don't speak, we are giving in to the silence of continuation of oppression. And if you see, I'm very disappointed, to be honest, as a Kenyan, when Kenya has been also elected at the United Nations Human Rights Council. Which human rights are we saying we are purporting to be practicing, where we are abducting people, women are being killed, no any legal action? When our president came into power, he said during his watch, there'll never be abduction. During his watch, there'll never be an extrajudicial killing. But currently, what are we experiencing, Kenyans? Are we not experiencing abduction? Are we not experiencing extrajudicial killings? Are we not experiencing normalization of femicide, where duty bearers, institutions that are supposed to protect us, they are not protecting us. Institutions that they are supposed also to condemn, they are reducing us to the level of, you need to be nice, you should stop going to the hotel, or you are a sex worker, or you are you're going to the men. I feel for me, it's also a responsibility of, if there's a criminality case, it's also how are we putting seriousness on the issues of women in our own diversity. Because if there's a perpetrator, the same way they did with this impeachment process, like the way my colleague said, my comrade, they should put the same effort in ending femicide. And having a blank statement, head of state saying, girls should be careful, should not trust stranger. I don't want to live in a country where I have to be fearful and not humanizing even men. I want to see men as human beings. But if my country cannot give me that protection, why are we having leadership? They should all resign.
Right.
And I repeat, they should all resign. Because we are the majority of voter, we are the majority of people who brought this government into power. And if we are the majority of people who brought this government into power, they should not use the same power to criminalize us even based on our sexual consent decisions. They should not criminalize based on who we choose to love or who not to choose to love, but also they should do the work in ensuring that criminals are brought into books.
Right. Now, let's look at the law factor. Like you mentioned right before we went on the break, she said before we went on the break that it takes 6 years, at times to even just look at a particular case and have its closing. And many people, most of these cases, some of the victims will tell you that they're still waiting, for a particular case to have even closure on who did what to who, right? And we're in 2024. So we're looking at a factor where we have law enforcement saying 90% of cases have been thoroughly investigated, but now there's the other opposite. And also we're looking at, at the same factor in terms of abductions and extrajudicial killings, right? So what do we look at here? How do we mitigate this? How do we balance this equation of not really quite understanding how the law has worked and how it hasn't worked in this case?
I'll start by first pointing out the aspect that these reports have largely been brought to the fore by the media. So the only data we currently have is mainly because the media is reporting on these cases. There's so many others that haven't been reported. There's a data gap right there in terms of knowing how many cases are happening, how many people are being abducted, how many women have, experienced femicide, how many of them we've lost. But other than that, there's the aspect of data missing in terms of the follow-up of those cases. Once the media gives us a case, there'll be a buzz in terms of this has happened. 1 week later, there's something else that is being reported. 2 weeks later, there's something else. The follow-up then is not there. We are not able to go to court to and witness, whether there's justice for these cases. And therefore, there's a gap in between, what law enforcement is saying they have investigated and thoroughly, and the aspect of access to justice for victims. What is justice for these victims? And in terms of looking at what the victims need, there's a big delay in the prosecution. There's a big delay in terms of the information being provided. There is a data gap, as already mentioned, and there is a need for us to close that gap. In looking at the delay, there's the aspect of the psychological, the physical, the sexual and reproductive health rights that are affected. There's re-traumatizing of the victim and the survivors. And in doing that then, is there justice? In coming up with a decision 10 years after the fact, there's a legal saying that justice delayed is justice denied. And therefore, we're not doing a justice to the survivors of gender-based violence, to survivors of extrajudicial killings, to survivors who have faced these abuses and have to wait years for them to have their day in court, or even just to have someone listen to them. Without victim blaming, as Rachel has mentioned, without feeling like they are the ones to blame. You mentioned issues around the internet. As human beings, we crave connection. I don't think we are an island. All of us crave connections with other people. And we live in an era where technology is our future. And therefore, in terms of the internet, using data tools, using online dating apps, going to meet people, it is something that we cannot avoid. It should not be used, the consent to meet people, the consent to have relations with other people should not be a license to kill us.
And maybe let me also add, you see, there's a delay, in terms of the delay of justice, there's a nexus between the delay and the reporting. So that when you see that there's a delay, many people will be unwilling to report because they can see, there's nothing happening. Even in terms of prominent cases like the late Sharon, where we had a former governor implicated. It's been 6 years. We are now going to 2025. The case is still proceeding. Why can't a case like that one take two weeks, like the one we saw for the deputy president? That efficiency is what we need in this country. If everything can move like that, then we'll be far away. So then if people see that there's nothing that is happening, they will be scared of reporting because they can see, why are we reporting? The case will never go anywhere. So there's that nexus between the lack of justice, the delay in prosecution, and then unreporting. And hence, it will continue like that unless things change in this country. People will be free, people will be scared to report, and it will continue, the perpetrators will continue because they'll be like, nothing much happens. The media will report, but after that, nothing much happens. Right. So we must really change everything in terms of how we want to treat femicide.
Right, and there's a, yes, I see you want to say something.
We're trying to do also a mapping. If you look also the report that was given by Jonah Lenamu, African Censored, Odipo Dev, and even like, because as End Femicide Movement, we continue to do different intervention every month during international days and also like as community intervention. One of the things that we have realized is that there's a lot of, if you're going to the same police station, that is very patriarchal, that has been shrined also some of these police officers, even with femicide cases, they are a perpetrator. How will they help you? It's impossible. Right. And even how the media also reports is also another case. Also that's something also media needs to look in terms of how they report femicide cases around narrative work. Because if you say it's homicide, it loses the whole meaning of femicide, because femicide you're targeted because you're a woman. If you look even with the protest that was ongoing, even with the Kware cases where a lot of women also were murdered, even around the invisibilizing the women who are murdered, invisibilizing the women who are abducted, invisibilizing also the shrinking civic space, because most of us, when we speak also as human rights defender, we're being targeted. Some of us have been targeted because of speaking truth to power on calling out this kind of oppression. So you find there's also that state-sponsored femicide. There's also the femicide that we experience within the community. Because if you look also according to the depot death, most of the women who have been killed, they've never been killed by strangers. So that's why I'm saying my statement with the president is problematic. Which camera is going to state us? This one. Mr. President, that's wrong. Because when we saw with that report is that a lot of people, women who are murdered is by intimate partner. It leads their husbands, their boyfriends, not the stranger is the least on its own, even family members killing people. So you find when the moment we say to say that is stranger, we're trying to run away from our responsibility as the government. The moment we're trying to say, oh, it's Airbnb, it's a lie. But the whole thing, this, if you see also, is a global crisis. We have seen also in countries like even Cameroon, women have come out. We have seen in countries like, let's say, Brazil, also like Marielle Franco. We have seen like Honduras, people like Pada Casiras, are very, very strong environmentalist activists being murdered. And even in Kenya, if you look within the civic space of human rights defenders and women human rights defenders, a lot of women are being killed who are activists. Right. And the justice takes longer. So you can imagine if you are supposed to defend people, but also you are being targeted and killed, and nobody is there to put in mechanism, or the state is not there, is a problem. And that's why if you ask me, even how things have happened, even with the protests of Reject Finance Bill, why most women went to the streets is because we felt floods came, women died, president said nothing. Femicide came, we marched more than 20 million women across the country, president said nothing, duty bearer said nothing. For those who had to come in and say something, they used it for their political mileage. And that's why they went to parliament. And that's why we are telling them, as women voters, being this is 16 days of activism, which is part of our life, we'll fight for our lives. We'll fight for our safety. And this one I'll urge Kenyan women, we should not be silenced. We should not be put in fear that when you speak, you're going to be abducted. Yes, we are being abducted, many people are being abducted, but when we keep quiet, they'll come for you. Right. So it has to be a collective struggle to ensure that we are able to put our duty bearers on check, to ensure that they're able, and institutions relevant to be held accountable. We can't, this is not business as usual, because about your life, and when your life is online, you have to fight for it to survive. Right. Yeah.
Let's take a look at the conflict in terms of those in leadership in regards to what this is supposed to look like, right? Now, like I said earlier in this conversation, we have 97 women so far reported killed. But we had the DCI boss, Mohammed Amin, saying that it is not per se, you know, just a gender thing. It is basically men and women in this particular scenario, which is not entirely false. But he was saying that in regards to the number, you know, that was put out. Now, let's also look at the aspects of the extrajudicial killings and the abductions up until literally, it was today that we saw the reports of Maverick Auko just, you know, being found. You know, what we know is she's getting treatment right now. You know, that was another said case of abduction. For this matter, we had also Boniface Mwangi the other day abducted from his home in Machako. So this is still happening. And then the European Union, together with other countries, with their ambassadors for that matter, came together. That is in a joint statement signed by ambassadors of Denmark, Finland, Germany, Ireland, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, and the British High Commission. And they were writing a statement saying they're concerned about the wave of abductions in the country. And they told the president that every Kenyan citizen has a right, you know, to give their perspective, right of say, right of freedom, you know. So it was for the government to be alerted on the same. And this is not, they're not the first ones, nor will they be the last ones. So there's a conflict in their understanding of this, plus what the president had said earlier on about him not being aware, you know, of the abductions, you know, in the country. So what is your perspective on how we can have a leadership that is not in tandem, especially security agencies, now that the president has told them once again to look into the matter of femicide? Now, let's combine all these things. I know I've said a lot. Okay,
she can
let's,
start.
all right, okay, okay.
Okay, so for me, let me reiterate once again that clearly what we've seen is lack of commitment from our law enforcement agencies. And when you see two of them, very senior law enforcement agencies, on the same day, in the same press conference, contradicting themselves, then there's a problem. They are not taking this thing seriously. They're not reading on the same page. So one says something, the other one says something contrary different. And you can see even the body language shows like, this is just normal, let's just business as usual. So that really annoys us. It perturbs us for us as civil society, because we need to take this thing seriously. And that's why we wanted the president to declare it today. It's a national crisis, but perhaps he will. But yes, he spoke about it. But the moment it comes from the top leadership, then it will trickle down to the law enforcement agencies. I know the president says today we need to deal with this thing firmly and decisively. I'm hoping the words will flow from just being rhetoric, because it was a national event, to proper actions.
But as they both have mentioned, it's something that has been said 2018 before. So,
Yeah, it's not the first time.
So what actions can be taken to ensure that this is actually done and mitigated?
Yes.
You know, because he is the highest form of, you know, power.
Yeah.
You know, and he's saying that, and he's redirecting them. What will be the difference from how it was said in the previous administration vis-a-vis what is said now in this administration?
I think moving forward then, I think our role as civil society is to take this step forward in terms of court. I mean, we can ensure that we do strategic impact litigation, because the state has a responsibility to protect its citizens. The fact that we, as Kenya, we have ratified international treaties which says the state ought to protect you, but we are saying the opposite. Maybe it's time we go to court. And even apart from court, we can go to the street. We can make it every Tuesday and Thursday, back to the street. If that is the only way they will listen to us, then why not? So we may need to look into it in terms of what else beyond, because we don't just want it to be, yes, the president has spoken, then after that, after another 1 week, we see the same unprecedented numbers of girls and women. Otherwise, we'll not move forward. So I take it, it's a challenge to us that we need to move forward with other strategies apart from just press statements. There's so much we can still do. And as lawyers, perhaps the court is the second avenue in terms of accountability. The state needs to be held accountable in terms of what is happening.
Right.
Yeah.
And also we need to look at how pacey these cases can be handled, you know, the pace at which, and now I would like you ladies to include also the other parts, which is the extrajudicial and the abductions, because there's so many cases, and the Kenyan Human Rights Commission keeps giving out those statistics, and they keep going higher, you know. Like you can see on our scrolls, Collins Jumais is still missing, you know, the Wajiri MCA, his whereabouts is still unknown. Others were just found the other day, like, you know, the two brothers. Yes, the Kitengela 3, yes, you know, the activist Bob Njagi. So you see, we can name a couple of, you know, whose investigations are still happening. And in some reports, we find that the police are also accused, allegedly, of the same, right? So it's a very contradictory, you know, avenue right here. And the law can look murky, but there is a law for that, right?
Yeah. For me, like, if I look from a perspective on both ends, is that also I'm a human rights defender or a feminist activist. I believe in the rule of law, but the same rule of law is being used to curtail justice. It's being used to curtail justice, which is not fair, it's not justifiable. And that's why I'm a bit skeptical when, for example, we continue to say, let's go to the courts. I believe we need to strengthen judiciary. I support it fully. But the same judiciary is the one which is being used not for us to get justice. And I have given example of cases that we have been involved as movements, as also in femicide, where even some of these judgments, apart from the Joey case, most of this judgment, they've been 30 years. 30 years, they've given someone, let's say, for example, who is like 30-year-old. Then later they come out, they come for you as a human rights defender or a woman human rights defender or an active citizen who was pushing for that justice. Who will protect you? A lot of people who are perpetrators, they're here outside. We had a case of also Rebecca. The athlete who was murdered. We have had a case of Tirop. Most of these perpetrators, they're out in bonds. If they're out in bonds, how sure are you they'll not come for us? So I feel for me, and also like the case of Bob Jangi, and the two brothers who also abducted with him, even Boniface himself, and Oko now. Where are we seeing justice for them? Because you abducted, we don't know what it has been done to them, for them not to speak out, which we respect. But still, as Kenyans, why are we quiet when people are being abducted? We're not following for them to get that justice. Because you're being abducted by the police. How will you go to a police to report another police? Because it was a bad experience even during Boniface Mwangi case. Like you're being abducted by, let's say, CID, you're being thrown left and center. The kind of impact it comes to your family, yourself, as someone who has gone also to exile, it brutally destroys you. It brutally also curtails the issue of democracy that we are speaking. And currently in a country now where we are now, the worst it can happen is when you don't trust the system is supposed to protect you. Kenyans, we don't trust our government at the moment. And that's the biggest crisis. Because now you're like, even now, I'm not sure if I'll talk here and then I get abducted outside. I'm not sure. Because that's what they're doing. You speak and then they abduct you. The next thing you're like, justice, free Rachel, or free Christine. But this is not like something that we should all keep quiet, because the Constitution of Kenya, which we fought so hard, or our ancestors fought so hard for us to have it, it was about our freedom. It was about our land. We are seeing also like the Adani issue. So anybody who's speaking, you're being curtailed. We are seeing even around politicizing of state-sponsored war and family protection, when people like even Kaluma, for example, who are coming up with laws that are criminalizing and inciting violence towards gender-conforming people. That's, for me, it's bad. And as Kenyans, the Utu we have in us, the constitutionalism we have in us, we should not allow politicians to curtail our life. We should not allow institutions that we fought so hard to have power to protect us, being the institutions that are being used to oppress us and victimize us. And I'm happy with the new trends of young activists in the country and civic engagement and people coming out to say that we are tired. And even the digital space, as much as it has its also other side of technology facilitated GBV, but you could see also there's an opportunity of mobilization. That's why when I see statement from European Union, I would say that's why we are desperately in need of global solidarity. The embassy here, they should be also the ones helping. You can't do business with the government that is oppressing and violating human rights. Right. You have to put it as a caveat of standard of ensuring that Kenyans are protected. This is our home. This is our country. We don't want to go to other people's country.
I see. Now, Hortense, I'd like to point this out to you. Kenyan Women Parliamentary Association demanded that the filling of the vacant position of the Cabinet Secretary for Gender, because we do not have that right now. Do you feel that will bring a major difference in the conversation we're having right now, when we have that position filled, when we have a Cabinet Secretary for Gender?
I think it will be a good start, but as my co-panelists have spoken, there is a disconnect in the system, the entire system, in terms of having the person to lead and how they then deal with the other, arms of government, as well as the other institutions involved. There's a big disconnect in how we are reporting, we are monitoring, we're investigating, we are punishing perpetrators, and therefore, while it would be a good start, there'll be need to do more. I'll start from where Rachel left on the trust deficit. One of the things that we need to stop doing is normalizing the violence. Whether or not we have, someone come into that unit to the State Department and we have someone come in, if us as citizens of Kenya continue to normalize this, if us as the government continue to normalize the occurrences, there's still a gap. We will not be closing that gap. The second thing would be around transparency. Even if we put in place a leader who comes in to advocate for the rights of women, but there is no transparency in terms of the frameworks in place, in terms of the systems in place, in terms of what is being done to hold the government accountable, then there'll still be a gap. So there is need to ensure more transparency, more accountability, so that everyone is able to know if someone has been abducted, then what happened? Has justice been done? Have they been found? Are they safe?
Do you believe there is enough sensitization on actually what you need to do in terms of when you're aware of something like this?
No. I don't think there's enough sensitization, and I think that's a big area, a big opportunity for civil society to come in terms of ensuring, first, people know their rights. When we speak about abductions, when we speak about femicide, and not link it to the right to life, the right to health, the right to be free from torture, cruel and degrading treatment, the right to ensure, you know, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression. We are missing it. And I think since we have tragically normalized these incidents, we do not see it as a human rights issue. We have isolated and siloed the issue so that it's just a one issue. Instead of looking at it as a human rights issue, something that relates to your dignity, you as a person. And therefore, there's a lot to be done in terms of sensitizing the people in terms of their rights, firstly, and also what can they do if themselves find themselves in that situation, or if someone they know, you know, finds themselves in that situation. But also, as my co-panelists have mentioned, you know, if the perpetrators are still the people we are going to report to, then where do we get the help? So it needs, the changes need to start from there. From the duty bearers committing to change and ensuring that they are ensuring the freedom, the security, the rights of the individuals that they are bound to protect.
Right. Now, like she mentioned, we have the 16 days of activism, and there's a lot that usually happens, you know, naturally within these days. How will it look like, you know, for us in this particular moment, given literally what we have seen since specifically June 25th, you know, coming forward? It's been quite an unrest in the country, and like we've all said here, the rate of abductions, extrajudicial killings, femicide is on an insane high at this, in this matter. So how will this, you know, look like this year?
I think we must prioritize the issue of femicide. I think as non-state actors we've started, and I've seen now the government is coming out clearly. But of course, for them, it's more reactionary, you know, because we've waited and waited for them to talk. It took the president today to speak. I think we've not heard from our women leaders. They're so quiet on this. What is happening to our women leaders, our MPs, our women reps, you know? So we feel a bit let down sometimes, because when you want them to speak, they don't speak. In fact, sometimes they push it to us. So I think the conversation...
I know we need to end, but you've said something very important.
Yes,
so,
yes.
so in like 2 seconds, because I need you all to comment when you go to speaking to your women reps, MCs, and like what happens. Yes.
So we want this conversation to happen. Non-state actors, state actors, let us be on the same page that femicide is a national crisis. Whether or not the president wants to declare it, we already know it's a national crisis. So let's move on. Let's set the agenda for the next 2 months before we move on to 2025. Let us do everything possible. Our activities ought to rotate around femicide as non-state actors. We want to go to the government offices declaring that this is a crisis. We want to do everything possible so that the next 2 months, let it be about femicide. Then that perhaps we'll see differences in terms of how do we handle it.
Okay, Rachel, very briefly as we wind up.
So fellow Kenyans, especially this one goes to men, call out abusive men, call out oppressive men, if you really care about women. This also goes to duty bearers, not just women duty bearers, all the duty bearers, as we all do as End Femicide Movement KE and Coalition for Grassroots Human Rights Defender. We're having a big press conference on Sunday in Mathare with also community leaders, civil society, grassroots churches, to say that we are tired. For us, we don't have to wait the president to declare. Us, we had already declared, but we need to push him to declare. So this goes also, if you are a political leader, if you're not speaking about femicide, we are going to occupy your office moving forward.
All right.
Yes.
Very briefly, Hortense. Very brief comments as a reminder. Yes.
In ending, I'll just like to say, you know, the violence against women is not tolerable. We should stop tolerating violence. In terms of looking at it from years back to date, you know, we should look at it as a generational thing. Women past, women now, women to come, children also being involved in this violence. Where is our future when the women and the girls of today are facing this violence?
Okay, quite noted. Ladies, thank you so much. I wish we had more time because, like I mentioned earlier, this is a co-conversation and we will be having more of it. It's quite important. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Right, you're welcome. You're welcome. Right, our guests today speaking on the spate of killings in the country have been Christine Kungu, FIDA Chairperson, Hortense Minishi, Deputy Executive Director and Head of Programs, Kellen, and Rachel Mwikali Mweni, ED, Coalition for Grassroots Human Rights Defenders, Kenya. And now my colleague Gladys Midecha is in studio ready, of course, to present to you the sports news. Stay tuned.
K24 Sports News, powered by Mozart Bet.
Back to the future. The future is simulate. Bet smarter. Win faster now. Be a winner.
Well, it's time for